Hey guys, we're going to talk about Chapter 3 today, and I decided to do a PowerPoint with some screenshots of my textbook so you guys could kind of get an idea about how I organize myself within the textbook. So I haven't screenshotted every page or every part of the textbook, but I did hit some high spots that I definitely want to talk to you about rules and things like that. And if we seem to like this format, this may be how I end up doing lecture for you on the particular points in the chapter that are going to be most important for you to understand. We'll expand in other chapters to me working out problems as well, probably during lecture. We've got capabilities to do that here on campus, so I figure we're going to deliver this in a multitude of ways. But what I decided to do first with Chapter 3, since census is pretty basic, we're going to start with screenshots of the book so you can, like I said, kind of see how I organize myself to see if you find that helpful for you. So I'm starting in the textbook, Chapter 3 on page 31, even though you don't necessarily see page 31 right now, but I do want you to take a look at it with the learning objectives and key terms. Those are things that are always available at the beginning of each of these chapters and will actually direct you in the types of things that you're going to be learning for the chapter. All right, so if you flip over to page 32, we're going to get to one of our first concepts, and you'll see that I've made a couple of notes where the rules are, and I call the inpatient census the head in the bed. If you've read through this chapter, you may be a little confused about the different types of censuses, which I think is a word. I'm making it a word. Censuses that you see, but the inpatient census is the most basic census that a hospital can collect. All right, so what does your textbook say? The rule says the inpatient census indicates the number of patients present in a healthcare facility at a particular point in time. Here's your rule. Hospitals only include inpatients in their calculations. So we're going to talk about newborns in a minute, but right now, inpatient census means your folks that are spending the night in your facility that, I mean, quite literally have their head in the bed. So when you think of inpatient census, I want you to think about your patients sleeping soundly in their beds, ready to have their heads counted to make sure that we count them as in the facility. So the next paragraph talks about a patient care unit. It introduces you to the book's abbreviation of PCU. The book will continue to use PCU as patient care unit. As you know, that's not necessarily an approved abbreviation across facilities, but this textbook uses PCU for patient care unit. The next paragraph explains how that census or the counting of the head in the beds is usually done. The third paragraph goes into your next rule, which is the inpatient census taking time is usually at midnight, but may occur at any time as long as the time is consistent for the entire facility. That is, each PCU conducts a census at the same time. All right, so that first sentence is very important. So if I were to ask you on a test or a quiz, when is the inpatient census taking time in a facility? The answer is not midnight. The answer is it's taken consistently throughout the facility at a designated time. Why do hospitals pick midnight? The paragraph goes on to explain, but it's difficult to account for your patients as they're moving throughout your facility during the day. So facilities like to choose midnight as a way to ensure that most of the time their patients are going to be in the bed. So that makes a lot of sense. So inpatient census, head in the bed, usually at midnight, but that's not what matters. What matters is that the units are taking the census consistently. If I work in ICU and you work in CCU, I can't take my census at midnight and you take your census at 1 a.m. We might have some movement and we might lose a patient. Well, not physically lose them, but lose them on the census. Okay, so the next thing that I've highlighted right here is that this textbook does a really good job of giving you important tips. The tip there explains exactly what a PCU is. So make sure as you're moving through the chapter that you are definitely reading the tip boxes. All right, so now that you've learned about the basic definition of an inpatient census, we're going to talk about a complete master census. That's on page 32. And this is pretty basic, y'all. It is the complete census for your patients in the facility. The number of patients admitted, discharged, and transferred in or out that day. So let's take a minute and talk about transfers. So now that you are in this program, you're going to learn that some of the terminology that you might have been using all along isn't correct terminology. And people in facilities do the same thing, y'all, so don't worry about it. So let's talk about the word transfer. When you're talking about a census, the word transfer means intra-hospital transfer. Okay, so that's pretty fancy. What does that mean? So an intra-hospital transfer are patients who are moved from one unit to another. So internally to the hospital, they're transferred within a unit. We use the term transfer loosely as lay people, healthcare consumers, to mean, oh, Aunt Betty got in a wreck and she started off at Thomasville and they're transferring her to Forsyth. Right? You've heard people say that before. They've started a facility, they're too sick to stay at that facility, so then we're going to transfer, you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes, we're going to transfer that person to a better institution that has a higher trauma level. So, how do we account for those folks? Typically, and I'm going to say this over and over and over, we are going to count those folks as an admission, right? They were probably admitted to our hospital, or they may not have been if they stayed in the ER, or a discharge. We're going to work all that out. I don't want you to worry about it. But when you see transfers in your homework or in this book, they're referring to intra-hospital transfers. Just know that if someone leaves your facility, y'all, it's a discharge. And we're going to break down admission and discharge here in a minute too. So hopefully that made a little sense about what they're talking about with that particular tip, that intra-hospital transfers are just that. Those are people that are transferred within the hospital and not discharged and transferred to another hospital. So it's a very important concept. So hopefully you have that. Okie dokie. The daily inpatient census, or I have an abbreviation here that you see, DIPC. You're going to see that abbreviation. The book doesn't necessarily have it written down for you, but you might see it in other places. So I like to expose you to lots of different things that you may see. So the DIPC is the number of inpatients present at census taking time. Remember, that was a couple of pages ago. And any inpatients who were both admitted after the previous census taking time and discharged between the next census taking time. So, I mean, like, what the heck does that mean, right? So, what that means is you have these folks that came into your facility after the census taking time. So, let's say they were admitted at 1 in the morning, right? You've got an example here too. So, for example, 20 patients on a particular PCU. One was admitted at 10 a.m. and the other was discharged at 7. So, if you've set your facility census taking time as midnight, this person came in after midnight and left before midnight. So when we're looking at the daily inpatient census, it's very important to calculate those folks, because guess what? This patient from 10 to 7 received services from us. And if we just relied on the head and the bed census, we wouldn't capture these folks. So here's a method called the daily inpatient census that allows us to record folks that have come and gone during in between the census taking times. Okay, so the daily inpatient census can be used by the clinicians and the chief of staff and things like that within the hospital that are going to make sure that the patients are counted, that the resources are counted, that we're allocating appropriately for them, and we're counting them. So So that and what? So what about inpatient service days? You see that I have written here inpatient service days equal the daily inpatient census, because y'all, they're the same number calculation wise. So between inpatient service day and daily inpatient census, I'll say it one more time, they're the same number calculation wise, but the definition is different. So you're collecting information. It's going to be the same number. You're going to calculate it the same, but they mean two totally different things depending on where in the hospital you're using them. So daily inpatient census, remember, helps us count everyone in the facility, while inpatient service days is a unit of measure. You see how I have that circled right there? It's a unit of measure denoting the services received by one inpatient in a 24-hour period. And so those inpatient service days, if we don't count those people who came and went, those admissions and discharges, then we're losing out, and we can't plan for them staffing-wise, budgetary-wise. I'm with you if you're scratching your head and like, why do we need two doggone words for the same number? Well, just remember that the number is the same, but how we use either inpatient service days or daily inpatient census are two totally different things. So then on page 35, your book goes into a few bullets on that one unit of service day isn't reported as a fraction of a day. It's a day, right? So if your patient came in and they were only with you, they were admitted at 10 a.m., from our previous example, they were admitted at 10, but let's say they left at noon. We're not going to say, ooh, they were only here 2 hours. We're going to say they were here a whole day. It's just easier that way. Here's another rule that can be important later on down the road, so I want you to make sure you're taking a look at this. The day of admission is counted, but the day of discharge is not. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why would we count the day of admission and not the day of discharge? If you've never worked in a facility before, or you haven't been an inpatient in a facility before, that may be a little foreign to you. Like, well, why wouldn't we count that as a day? So what this means is that the types, if you're thinking about the true definition of this, the services received by one inpatient, then the day of admission, your patient is receiving a higher level of service, more services, if you want to say it that way, than they are on the day of discharge. Let's talk about the day of discharge. I mean, they're not sitting around painting their fingernails or anything, but the day of discharge, there isn't a lot going on, y'all. They're sitting around. They're waiting for a discharge order from the doctor. They may sit around for most of the morning or half a day waiting for the doctor to round to make sure that they're eligible for discharge still. Then they got to have the doctor write the order, and then the discharge is put into motion at that point. So there's not a lot happening service-wise on the day of discharge. So if you think of it that way, then this particular bullet makes sense. The day of admission is counted, but the day of discharge is not. If you counted both days, then it would be a little bit of inflation. This third bullet talks about leave of absence. I'm going to quickly tell you what leave of absence is, but I don't want you to spend a lot of time trying to worry about leave of absences because they don't happen a lot in modern day inpatient facilities. They're going to happen more in your long-term care facilities, such as if you had a patient in a nursing home or one that was in kind of a long-term behavioral health situation. I'm not saying they don't ever happen, but they're quite rare. And so what a leave of absence is it means literally your patient can take a leave. They can be admitted in the facility and they're like, hey, my daughter's getting married today at 2, so I'm going to check out of the facility, really just kind of leave. I'm going to leave for about 6 hours and then I'm going to come back after my daughter gets married. Y'all, that just doesn't happen much anymore. So that's a quick definition about what a leave of absence is, but I don't want you to have to worry about it. So at the top of page 36, we're going to round out this video because I get 15 minutes of video, lucky you. So we're going to round out this particular video at the top of page 36 with just talking about this second kind of highlighted area right here. It talks about the many ways that we're going to call an inpatient service day. Patient day, inpatient day, bed occupancy day, or census day. Lots of different ways to refer to it.